Hey guys, I have another piece of vintage tactical equipment to discuss for you all today, and what we have here is what's known as the bonus strike vest, also more commonly referred to as the AWS AK vest in collector circles due to its uncanny resemblance to the Chinese Type 56 Chicom chest rig. Although it's important to note in this particular case that AWS neither designed nor produced this chest rig as far as I've been able to research. These, as many of the other chest rigs I've discussed so far, were developed through input of several Delta Force operators giving their suggestions to their unit tailor, who would create custom chest rigs and tactical vests based on their description, and this vest is no exception. But where does the term bonus strike come from? Why is it called the bonus strike vest? So that's also a little bit of a mystery, and almost certainly was never the original name for this vest, as it was created prior to the application of that term. But what we do know is that two specific Delta operators, George E. Hand IV and Norm Hooten, supposedly both referred to this vest as the bonus strike vest. And the possible explanation for that name comes from a quote from George Hand saying, "Bonus strike was a mission I was privy to," in reference to using this chest rig during Operation Gothic Serpent, or shortly after, where A-Squadron came in to relieve members of C-Squadron who had taken place during the Battle of Mogadishu. So it's possibly implied that bonus strike was the name of the task given to A-Squadron as they came in to relieve the very tired C-Squadron who had just taken place in the incident of Black Hawk Down. So that aside, that's all hyperbole. There's no substantiated evidence for that, but that's the word I'm going to take for now, so take that as you will. But let's begin to break down the history of this chest rig before we begin to talk about this particular replica that I've made and the details of its construction. So, the earliest reference that I have of these chest rigs in use is in 1986 during a counter-assault training mission in Atlanta, Georgia, where several operators can be seen using this chest rig, and I believe almost all of them, if not all of them, can be seen wearing it. And it's possible that it may have been developed prior to this, possibly as early as 1984, 1985, but I don't have evidence of that, and all of the examples that I've seen have buckle dates around 1988. So unfortunately, we don't have any earlier examples that I know of to substantiate production of this vest earlier than 1986. So that aside, it can be deferred that it was used in training missions around the mid-1980s, but the most prolific use of this vest was during Operation Acid Gambit, where Kurt Muse was held prisoner after operating an anti-Noriega radio station and was held captive at the Modelo prison in Panama, and several A-Squadron members came in on December 20th, 1989 and on several Little Bird helicopters and rescued him from the prison, and that was the first successful hostage rescue mission undertaken by Delta Force at the time. So in several reference photos, we can see this chest rig also being used by operators. It's not everyone has it, but quite a few of them do, enough for it to be substantial as the vest that was most commonly used by A-Squadron at the time. After Acid Gambit, as I mentioned before, A-Squadron carried this vest during Operation Gothic Serpent, or more accurately, shortly thereafter, as they came in to relieve C-Squadron, and a couple reference photos show the vest in use at the time in 1993. After this, throughout the mid-1990s, a couple photos can be seen of A-Squadron members using this vest for training missions, but other than that, we don't really see this vest all too often after this. And the last documented case of the bonus strike vest in use was surprisingly in 2001 during the Battle of Tora Bora and the hunt for Osama bin Laden, where one Delta operator can be seen using a variation of the bonus strike vest as part of his personal kit. So very interesting to note that they lasted that late within the unit, but that's all the history we have on it for now, so let's begin to break down the construction and the layout of this chest rig. Not that there's a whole lot to it, but there's a few things for me to discuss for you guys. So, as I already mentioned, this is a replica. Originals are exceedingly rare. A very limited number of them were made custom by unit riggers between the mid-1980s and presumably 1990. The latest buckle dates I have seen on these are dated to around 1989, so I can presume that they stopped making these for A-Squadron sometime before 1990. So, that being said, they all generally follow the same pattern. They have 3 central magazine pockets in the center. A majority of them will each hold 2 M16 30-round box magazines. However, there is a variation of this chest rig, which is supposedly able to hold M14 magazines due to its shorter pockets. However, the person that owns this chest rig, I've not been able to get any reply from after reaching out to him, so that's a bit unfortunate, and these are the only photographs we have, so I'll leave that for you to decide whether or not it's truly for M14 mags, or whether or not the flaps, because they're not buttoned, just appear to make the pouches shorter, being due to the fact that they hang lower when they're unfastened. That aside, there's obviously the 3 mag pouches in the center, and then on each side of it, we have these 2 accessory pouches, and I'm not entirely sure what these would have held. My current thesis is that they held either field dressings or tourniquets, small miscellaneous items, maybe even firing devices or det cord, things of that nature. I initially thought that they might have held flashbang grenades or smoke grenades, but as you can see, a smoke grenade is a little bit too long for the pouch, and if the flap were a bit longer, it might work, but there's just no way as it currently exists. And I should mention that this is based entirely off of an original. Someone who owns an original example of the bonus strike vest, in fact, George E. Hand's example, was kind enough to provide me exact measurements and photographs of every meticulous detail that he could, so that I could create this replica as accurately as I could. So I'd like to make that noted if anyone questions why specific pouches don't appear to hold specific things, such as smoke grenades. And then obviously on the very outer edges, you have the fragmentation grenade pockets for the typical M67 fragmentation grenades at the time, or whatever grenades Delta would have been using. So that aside, that's the overall layout typical of these vests. It doesn't really change other than that. On some examples, the pouches may be positioned higher or lower, but they all have the same basic design. 3 mag pouches in the center, 2 accessory pockets, 2 grenade pockets, all on a hexagon-shaped body with very simple 1-inch shoulder straps with 2 ITW Fastex buckles in the center, fixed at the rear, and then a 1.75-inch waist strap made of either 4088 Type 7 or 4088 Type 8 webbing, and I've opted to use 4088 Type 7 webbing just because it's my personal favorite. So let's begin to break down just closer details of the construction and discuss a little bit more from there. So, opening up the magazine pouch, there's really not a lot to it. You can see that there's a single dot fastener in the center. I know some replicas, like the ones Shekin Gears makes, they have opted to add Velcro onto this portion here. I've never seen any examples of these that have Velcro here. It is possible. In fact, some of the replicas at the Fayetteville Airborne and Special Operations Museum do have replica bonus strikes that have Velcro in this spot here, but I've never seen any original examples that do, so I'm going to continue to reproduce them as they exist with just a single dot fastener holding the flap in place as I have it, until I have more photographs of examples that prove otherwise. So, looking inside the pouch, there's a couple different ways that these pouches were assembled here. The most commonly you'll see them is like this, where it's a very simple boxy pouch. They have a seam running up the corners here to give it a more rectangular profile and to also cinch down a little bit of excess fabric so the magazines aren't rattling around inside. And you can see that the gross grain trim, which I should note is 3/4 of an inch and is not 1 inch. Notice a lot of replicas, for whatever reason, opt to use 1-inch webbing, or excuse me, 1-inch gross grain trim for finishing the edges of the pouches, and that is not correct. All AWS and rigger-made pouches of the period use 3/4 inch. I cannot stress that enough. But anyways, aside from that, you can see how the trim goes along the edge, stops, they cut it, and then they do the other side, and they just go straight across. Not all of them were like this. Some of them had mitered corners where it's just one continuous strip going around, and some of them also lacked the stitching on the corners here to give it that rectangular profile, because the openings of the pouches on those examples would have gross grain around the opening, whereas this, on most examples, you could see they have 1 inch of material just folded over, raw edge, sewn down, and that's good enough as it needs to be. But as I mentioned, that's not the case with all examples. Such as Larry Vickers' example here, you can see it has all of those alternative features, like the mitered corners and the non-stitched vertical edges of the pouches, as I mentioned before. And let me just go ahead and remove all the other magazines from the vest so I can begin to, so I can manipulate it a little better on camera for you guys. One thing you may notice in photographs of originals and even a lot of period photographs of these vests in use is the dot fasteners, these snaps here, almost always are pictured with the black oxide finish worn off. And that is actually something I tried to replicate for myself, but I just couldn't get the results that I wanted. So I'm just going to suck it up, wear my gear like a man, and let the finish wear off naturally as I have it here. On the bottoms, you can see the large drain grommets, which I should note are number 0 spur grommets. I was originally using plain grommets to finish these, but that is not correct. Plain grommets were used on a multitude of other Delta Force custom chest rigs, but on the bonus strike vest, all I've seen so far are number 0 spur grommets, as I have it here. Just kind of interesting to see bare brass grommets, just such large, beefy grommets on the bottom of these chest rigs. Just little interesting details like that make these vests kind of amusing to me. That's really all that can be said about the pouch arrangements, as far as I'm aware. Talking about the shoulder straps, though, so as you can see, these have 2 ITW Nexus or ITW Fastex, depending on what was used. There's a variety of different side release buckles used on these vests. You'd have these side release buckles on the front here for detaching the shoulder straps quickly in the event you needed to quickly doff the vest, and in most cases these were permanently fixed at the rear. However, the case with the M14 vest, they have additional buckles at the rear, only solely because on the very front of the top edge of the vest where these side release buckles are, they have finished it with a set of loop lock rings so that the vest may be attached to the chest loops of TG Faust body armor that Delta would have been using at the time. But that's the only example that I know of where it has that as a feature. All other examples will have the buckles in the center here, and that's no loop lock rings for TG Faust armor. That's the sole example I know of. But the shoulder straps did vary a little bit in their construction. As I have them here, this is the most common design, where they're made of a continuous strip of 1-inch 5038 Type 4 lightweight webbing, square weave. Very interesting stuff. This was used before 17337 webbing was more common in the tactical market, and it's a very good webbing. I absolutely love this stuff, even though it's not as durable as the 17337. It's just a very interesting webbing that you don't really see in use anymore. But other examples of these vests will have sections of 1.5 inch wide 5038 Type 4 to better pad out the shoulder straps, make it a little bit more comfortable. And the one seen during the Battle of Tora Bora, in fact, actually has fully 1.5 inch shoulder straps with 1.5 inch buckles on the chest. But that's all that needs to be said about shoulder straps, though. There's a couple other features with them that are a little bit different on some examples, but on the whole, this is the most common design that you'll see for the shoulder straps on the bonus strike vest. As for the waist strap, as I mentioned before, these are typically 4088 Type 7 webbing, which is 1.75 inches wide roughly. It's actually more like 1 inch and 23/32 of an inch, but it's easier to say 1.75 inches. Other examples of these vests will use 4088 Type 8 or Type 8B webbing, which is more similar to seatbelt webbing, but I prefer this yellow flecked 4088 Type 7 just because it's just so beautiful, and that little bit of yellow just gives a nice pop, and it's just, again, why some of the little things that make vintage tactical gear so beautiful to me and why I love it so much. On the back of the vest, you can't really see anything of substance. It's just a hexagon, lozenge-shaped base vest with nothing really added to it. But you can see the stitching goes all the way to the back, and it's just a simple up and down straight stitch to hold the pouches on. And if you wanted to remove the pouches to replace them or to rearrange them, you certainly could do that. Just go at it with a seam ripper and restitch them on. The buckle for the waist strap is a standard ITW Nexus SR2 buckle. On originals, it would have been an earlier Fastex SR2, back when ITW Nexus was called Fastex. And I do have a substantial amount of period-dated buckles in my collection, but I've chosen not to add them to my replicas due to the fact that I'm worried that these will eventually be resold as originals and get more money than I'm selling them for. So that's my reasoning behind that. And the only other detail to point out is these elastic keepers on the adjustable side of the waist strap to cinch up the excess webbing, and these were cut a considerable length, so these could be worn around TG Faust body armor or cinched closer down if they're worn on their own. That's all that needs to be said about that. I can't really think of any other details that I can add. And if you want to order one of these replicas for yourself, I do make them to order. You can check me out on Instagram at GMB Solutions, and I will put a link down in the description below. And that's really all I have to say on these vests. They're very, very cool designs, and I appreciate the help of the very kind collector who is able to give me measurements so that I can make the most accurate replica possible at this point. So, that being said, if you have any comments or have any information that I may have missed out on and did not mention in this review, feel free to leave it in the comments below, and I will see you all with the next piece of gear. See you then.